Cool. So I'm Christoph, and I present you something on shared sequencing economics. So this is loosely based on some recent FC paper, financial cryptography paper, I had with Akaki from Off-Chain Labs. We want to understand the economics of shared sequencing. So, context. So we have currently, still people come in. All right. We currently have around about 50 rollups on Ethereum. As we're speaking today, I checked on L2 Beats, either live in production or currently sort of to be deployed. And that seems to satisfy sort of the original goal of the rollup-centric roadmap, right? We wanted to scale Ethereum, so which means we wanted to have many rollups in order to scale the throughput of the base layer. But we have then this additional problem of now fragmentation of usage. And in particular, if you're interested in financial applications, you have fragmentation of liquidity across several domains, right? And that's sort of not good. And of course, Vitalik has already written about this in 2021, right, in his endgame post. So there was one particular scenario where you have this different roll-ups, sort of being many roll-ups, and then he had this idea that probably there should be cross-domain MEV extraction that would link together all of these different roll-ups. And you can think of shared sequencing as a technology that might facilitate that MEV extraction, or that might facilitate sort of moving liquidity around between different domains. Okay? So that was a starting point sort of this project. And then we were wondering, okay, those questions might be obvious to you, but we wanted to understand them theoretically. So suppose we have shared sequencer, and we have this cool functionality that we can have atomic executions of bundles of transactions on different roll-up domains, right? So it would be super cool if I can place one leg of my trade as an arbitrageur on Arbitrum and one on Optimism, and I'm guaranteed that they both executed, or neither of the two are executed. And then you could be wondering, okay, what does it do to MEV extraction? What does it do to cross-domain trading? What does it do to overall market efficiency in the system? And what does it do to revenue for the sequencers? Or the sequencer, the shared sequencer, and so on. What does it do to revenue on each sequencing domain? Okay? And so you can now answer this sort of as an armchair theoretician, because they are not live yet anyway, so you can go full theory, berserk, and do game theory, and that's what we did. So here's a mental model I like about trading on these different domains. So you can think of in-domain or cross-domain trading as a contest. And sort of if you think about designing transaction ordering policies, what you actually also do if you do shared sequencing, you sort of orchestrate a contest, or the rules of a contest, a trading contest, right? So if you think about what rollups are nowadays doing, first come, first serve, you basically design a contest around faster inclusion. If you do priority gas auction like in ancient days on Ethereum, you incentivize some kind of bidding competition. Okay? And now here's the shared sequencing sort of idea. So if you do shared sequencing, you basically what you do is you reduce noise in the competition, right? You make it easier to coordinate between different domains, and that sort of removes some kind of noise in the competition. That means, first of all, maybe you can realize more MEV gains that you previously couldn't realize, and maybe that will be beneficial to those competitors in this context. Okay? That's the entire idea. Now let me give you a minimal model of that economic situation. So think about two searchers competing to make a profitable cross-domain ARB trade, MEV trade, whatnot. So it has some value to be executed, and then you want to, if you want to win this competition for the trades, then you would like to place two transactions, one on two domains, right? One on Arbitrum, one on Optimism, before the competitor. If you do, if you're successful, if you manage to put in both before your competitor, then you're good, right? So you can generate that value for yourself. Okay? Now, if you think about this competition, you can generically think about a competition by investment in some kind of signal, right? So if you're a searcher in this world, then what you can do is you can sort of invest to be better in this competition. And I give you some kind of interpretation of that. So if you're in a first-come, first-serve world, then you basically invest into reducing your timestamp, right? You invest in reducing your latency. You invest in collocation, for example, right? So that's your investment, your signal, right? In a PBS world, you have a very sort of complicated ecosystem, but in the end, you invest in some way or another in a bit, right? Or maybe in some kind of infra that helps you placing your trades on top of the block or in the position that you like them, right? And if you think about other kind of solutions like Arbitrum has proposed, and I've worked a bit on, you might do a combination of both, right? So you might do some latency investment plus bidding and so on. So depending on how you set up those rules, right, you get a different kind of way of organizing this competition. But in the end, what you have is some kind of signaling strategy and some kind of investment by those searchers in this world. Okay. Now, I wanted to talk a bit about this randomness in this contest, right? So I told you, okay, my mental model of a shared sequencer, like on a bird's eye high-level view, is just a way of reducing noise in the competition. So you can think of a noisy competition, right? So you make your investment as a searcher, as an arbitrageur, but you're not sure that you win, right? So there's always some noise component to it. There's still some random factors in this world. And so in the end, what you have is some kind of model where you would combine some signals that you produce from your investment plus some random factors that are out of your control. So that's the kind of model we have in mind, okay? And then you win basically when your signal plus your noise is better than the signal plus noise of your competitor. All right. And now you have a bit of a grip on what does it do to competition if you compare shared sequencing regime to a separate sequencing regime. And it's simply for the fact that you now compare a situation where you need to win sort of one global competition versus a situation where you need to win several sort of local races, right? So think about the situation where you have to place one trade on one domain, one trade on the other domain. What you have to do is in the shared sequencing case, you just need to produce one signal, and that signal plus noise should be better than that of your competitor. If you do separate sequencing, you produce two signals, right? And both of them, plus the noise, the added noise, should be better than those of your competitor. So in mathematics, you compare basically a cumulative, and then you compare the squared of the cumulative. Okay? If you think about independent noise, right? Maybe there's some correlation, right? So if I'm good in placing trades on Arbitrum, I'm also good in placing trades on Optimism. So it might not be independent, but certainly it's not perfectly correlated, right? So you have more variance in this shared sequencing regime. Okay. So what does it tell us in the end? What does it tell us about my initial questions about, okay, do we have more efficiency, more investment, more revenue, etc., pp. So you can solve this model, assume some stuff, find a symmetric Nash equilibrium of this game, and then it can tell us certain kind of things about the effects of domain integration, right? What does it do in the end? The model tells you there's an equilibrium, there's a threshold on value, right? So if the value of the opportunity of the ARP is too low, people will just not extract it, right? It becomes too expensive, you wouldn't do that. If it's high enough, there is some threshold after which it's high enough and worthwhile to exploit it, then both bidders enter in this sort of competition. They try to outcompete each other, and then the investment obviously is increasing in value and depends on the variance in this competition. Here's the punchline. If you compare shared sequencing to separate sequencing, then just this threshold is lower, right? Which seems to be obvious, but it's good to prove it mathematically, right? So intuitively, there are more opportunities that you can extract in this game, because now you do shared sequencing. You can extract more MEV, you can have more trades, and that should have a positive effect on all kinds of global parameters, right? Liquidity provision and so on. So that's sort of maybe not the most surprising part. right? Sort of meets basic intuitions. But then you can also think about actually conditional on entering this competition. What does it do to investment? Okay, so you can think about well, do those searchers actually compete sort of harder? Do they invest more in the world of a shared sequencer versus the world of separate sequencing? And sort of now you have two effects, right? So you basically charge them twice in some sense if you do separate sequencing. And they're still competing in this cross-MEV extraction game, one on each domain. But then you also have sort of a more reliable signal, right? So you have more returns on investment if you do shared sequencing, right? So you have a better control of your outcome. So your investment controls you, gives you a better idea of given what you invest, you have a better idea whether you will actually gain something. So those are the two effects, and then you can trade them off, right? So what it does in the end is gives you a kind of more like nuanced answer of equilibrium investment. So you have a dependency on the noise in this contest, and you have a dependency on market structure, on the sequencing rule, right? So it depends, actually, that's what we find, it depends very much on how you organize the competition in the different sequences in the shared sequencer. I'll give you a bunch of examples. So we looked into constant cost elasticity, which is maybe an okay approximation to what we would expect in a first-come, first-serve competition. And there you have basically a result of the kind, okay, in a shared sequencing regime, not only will people will enter the competition for lower values of the arbitrage, but also conditional on entering, they will invest more, right? So they will compete harder in this regime, okay? So that's sort of the bottom line of this proposition, okay? Then we looked into another kind of sequencing rule, time boost. I don't know whether you know it. That was a proposable arbitrum about half a year ago, or even longer ago. So where they basically came up with a sequencing rule where they have the order transactions based on a score, and the score combines a timestamp component and a bidding component. So people send in a bid together with a transaction. We take some function of the bid and the timestamp, call that the score, and then order transaction based on that score. Okay? And in that case, we figure out, okay, there it depends very much on the value of the ARP and on the noise distribution. So for this kind of sequencing policy, it can be sometimes the case that if you do shared sequencing with it, that you generate lower revenue than you would if you do separate sequencing. Okay? So it really depends on these different parameters of this game. Finally, if you do some kind of PBS type of market structure, I mean, it's very hard to come up with a sort of reasonable idea of what is the cost structure of the competitors in this market, right? So there are all kinds of things that collectively create a signal for them. So they might pay some expenditure on fees, on tips, and so on infra, on some kind of payments to intermediaries in the MEV supply chains. Not entirely clear. You tell me, maybe it's some kind of almost constant marginal, I would say, right? Because there are substantial economies of scale in these kind of markets. But regardless, what you can find in the end is you might have some kind of, depending on the cost structure, you have some kind of situations where shared sequencing has ambiguous effect on sequencer revenue. It's not always that you make more money if you do shared sequencing, right? Which might be surprising. Right? The first part was less surprising, right? So overall more value is generated, overall more MEV is extracted, but from the point of view of the sequencing entity, if it wants to generate some revenue, it might be that it makes less if they integrate the domain rather than if they stay separate. So TLDR of all of that is mechanism matters. Right, so for this comparative statics. Okay. Oops. So that sort of looks at the global pie that you can extract, right? Of course, you can also look sort of what we've seen in previous talks. We can look at revenue across distributional concerns of the kind of, so there's one one domain and another domain. One domain generates less value than another domain, right? And so they might have conflicting or different motivations to integrate, right? So they might have more or less of a gain from integration. That has bearing on whether they actually want to do that, right? We also heard about we have to solve this problem of revenue sharing. So even if we make overall more revenue, we have to think about how we do that. And that also has bearing then on who will participate in these games. And of course, all of this is sort of a theoretical exercise. I have absolutely no idea what is the size of unrealized cross-domain MEV that would get unlocked with shared sequencing, right? So you can only have guesses around that. Right, so those are some caveats. Okay, to wrap that up a bit. So if you do this kind of comparison, horse racing comparison of shared and separate sequencing, and look at it from a very much bird's-eye view on just the structure of competition that it induces, then you find that the mechanism that you use, the transaction bordering policy that you use, or the market design that you use, determines very much who gains and loses from domain integration, and actually how much we gain or how much we lose from domain integration. So mechanism design matters a lot. And sort of second sort of conclusion I would give is some people or some entities, some players in this game might benefit a lot, right? Might benefit a lot from integration. And some might do less so, or there are even circumstances where you make less revenue from integration, domain integration. And so if you really want to bootstrap this entire thing, right, if you really want to, because there are economies of scale, right, shared sequencing only works if many sort of participate, then I think some serious persuasion is necessary you need to talk to people to convince them that they actually make more from shared sequencing. All right. I think that's it.